Hello, in this video I want to give you a few practical tips on how to use my 3D printed shader, which is available for gold tier patrons at patreon.com/chrisp and at Blender Market. So let's jump right into Blender and check it out. Here I am in Blender 3.3.0 Alpha, which is the latest and the greatest at the time of this recording. I also tried the 3.2 beta and the 3.1.2 stable version, and the 3D printed shader works in all of these current versions. This is actually the first question I get quite frequently. People say that it simply doesn't work. So what do? This is the file that you can download from Blender Market or from Patreon. It is the 2021-05 Crispy 3D printed version 2 for Blender 3.blend file. And if you want to know if it generally works in your Blender version, just open the file that you downloaded. And this is what you will get. Now, in order to determine if it works, just give it a quick render by pressing F12. Of course, you can also switch over to the rendered preview, and you can see that stuff is happening. We do have like the layers here, the printed layers. We have something happening on top here, which is this top infill that the shader automatically generates. Also here on the transparent, you can see we have the lines. We have the top infill lines here. It's a little bit hard to see on the transparent. So let's just give it a quick render by hitting F12, and then we have to wait a few minutes. Okay, I just stopped the render after 240 something samples. Let's see, what do we have to look for to determine if it's working? First of all, you can see we have the print lines going on the sides here, and then we have something on top here, which would be the top infill or the top fill layer that the 3D printer has to generate. Also down here, we have the lines everywhere going across, and here we have the top fill going here. You can also tell that there's something here, which is also that top fill, also on the top here. Now this is still a little bit grainy because I stopped the render, but you can tell that it's working, right? Also here on the transparent, we have the lines here. We can see through it, so we see the infill, the simulated fake infill, basically, that the shader generates. And also on top here, we also have that top fill part. Okay, so this is what you have to look for. If it looks like this when you hit F12 after opening the original downloaded file, then you know it's working in your Blender version. Now let's look at some of the things that you have to do or you can change here, the setup of the shader. For that, I'm going to disable the transparent one because that really slows things down. Now let's zoom in here and let's look at those layer lines. It looks like there aren't any layer lines. It looks like it's a sphere that just has like lighter and darker lines. And the reason for that is that by default, I do not have the subdivision, the adaptive subdivision modifier on this orb here switched on in the viewport. It is switched on for the render, but not for the viewport. So let's switch this on. Now Blender has to work very hard because it has to calculate the adaptive subdivisions based on the current camera view. And you can tell that, yes, we do have actually displaced geometry. We can zoom in, we can see we have those top fill lines going across here. You can look around and you can make sure that it's actually working, right? We have steps going down here. We also have some imperfections happening here, which is a feature of the 3D printed shader. You can add those imperfections because most 3D prints do have some imperfections. So let's see, what can you actually adjust here? Let me move this out of the way for just a second and cut these noodles. So this would be the 3D printed plastic node. If you hit Shift A down here and you go to group, these are the groups that are part of the shader file, and these are used to make up these 3D printed shader effects. The 3D printed plastic is basically just a combination. If I zoom out and if I select this and hit tab, I can go into this node group. And this is just a setup to have different renders for cycles and for EV. And really the magic comes from this node group, which we can also step into, and then it looks like this. So all of this is just to create this effect and the top infill. And you can get back out of this node group to this one and then back out again to this one with this little back arrow here. So basically you don't even have to go into this node group. You can change almost anything or everything using this 3D printed plastic node group. This has some handy inputs here, as you can see. First of all, you can set the color. This is our white plastic. And down here we have orange plastic and blue plastic. So you can set the color. You can change the surface scattering effect if you want some. Again, this slows down your render, but for plastic, this can be very nice looking. I think on the orange here, I have that enabled a little bit. Yeah, you can see here. And also on the blue, but let's go back to the white. Then we have layers, which is just a number, which would be the resolution on the Z-axis, right? So on a 3D printer, you usually have a layer height. And on the shader here, you just have a setting for how many layers do you want. If you set this to a lower value, you will end up with much thicker layers like this. So much more coarse and less detail. Or you can set this to higher values. You have lower layer heights on a 3D print. Then you have add imperfections. I already showed you. I'm going to switch this off real quick again because it really slows down the viewport here. So the imperfections are those bumps here, those things that are being added all over your render, and you can set this with this value. The top cutoff value is where should the shader start to render the top fill layer. Now, on a real 3D print, this would just be the last layer or the last few layers. But of course, since this is just a simulation or an approximation of a 3D printed part, we have this top cutoff and it's currently set to 0.9. If I set it to 0.95, you can see this area up here is much smaller. But of course, then we get these much bigger steps going down here. If I set it to 0.8, then all of this would be a top fill layer, which makes no sense in this case. So this is a value you just have to play with, and by default it's just set to 0.9. The top fill rotation, well, that's exactly what that is. These lines here have a direction, just like on your 3D printer. The way it's on your print bed and the way, however your slicer does it, and whatever settings you have in your slicer, you can rotate the direction of this top infill. And to demonstrate this, I'm just going to jump right down here. Preview can be 0, which is the real shader, or if you set it to 1, you get a black and white preview, which is built into this shader node here. So by setting it to 1, I have a preview, and now I can play with the top fill rotation, and you can see in real time what's happening when I rotate the top infill. So usually you want this to be some sort of diagonal rotation. Okay. And the displace scale, if I set this back down to 0, we get the real shader. If you have the subdivision switched on, you can play with the displace scale, which is basically just a factor and multiplier on how much do you want these steps to stick out of your model or be pushed in to your model. So you can play with these values to change the look of your 3D printed shaders simulator, basically. Because it's not real, of course, it's not real geometry. It is all done with the shader, and it only works because of this subdivision surface set to adaptive subdivisions. In order for this to work, you have to be on cycles, you have to be on experimental feature set, you can render on whatever, but also you have to be on here, you have to be on displacement and bump, because these displacements and also the imperfections are done in the shader node with displacement, with actual displacement, which then shows up because you have adaptive subdivisions switched on. Okay, so don't forget that this switch is switched off by default when you open the file. And if you don't see any actual steps going down here in your viewport, this is probably the reason why. Okay, now let me bring that node back in here that I took out before. Why do I have this node? What is this node? This is also a node group, so you can select it, hit tab and jump into it. This is just a group for all of these values: the layers, the imperfections, the cutoff, the rotation, the displacement scale, and the preview 0, 1. So what is this good for? Well, in this file here, we already have several different objects that use different 3D printed materials. Like this one uses the orange, this one uses the blue, and then of course this one uses the white. If you want, you could say, okay, I want just 20 layer lines on my white and I want a much higher resolution on the blue, like this. But if you want all of these values to be the same on all shaders that you have, on all objects that you have, you would have to go into each, this is a bit much, you would have to go into each shader and then change it if you need to change something. And that is why I created this node. This is just a group. So you plug the layers in here, the imperfections in here, the cutoff in here, the rotation, the displacement, the preview. And instead of changing the values here individually on the white plastic, we can go into this node group with tab and then change it for all the different shaders that use this node group. So if I go back out, you can see the blue one uses this node group. The orange one uses this node group. The white one now uses this node group. And if I now go in and change the layers to 100, all shaders, the orange, the blue, and the white, now have 100 layers. Or if I set it to 50, I'm changing one value for all objects in all shaders. And this is just a little convenience group to do exactly that, so that you have a consistent, like if it was printed with the same slicer settings on the same printer, just in different colors, filaments. Okay, so that's all that this is. This is probably confusing the first time you see this. You don't need this. If you cut all these noodles, you can set it individually here. Or if you connect all those noodles, then you have one place for all your shaders. Okay, so this would be the global parameters. Let me just hit Shift A group. You can see here we have the 3D printed global params. That's this guy. Then we have the 3D printed plastic. That's this guy. And internally here, it uses the 3D printed layers, which is also here. And then the transparent one, let me switch that back on quick. This thing here, this is using the 3D printed transparent, which is a different node group with some of the same inputs like layers, imperfections, and all of that. But it also simulates this fake infill, which when you let it render a little bit, you can see it looks like it has infill in here, right? And that's why this 3D printed transparent shader also has these options here, like how dense do you want your infill, or how much infill do you want, how dense should it render, because this is a volume shader. So how much light should these fake infill pieces absorb? That's basically this. And then, of course, you need to have the outside, the shell, to be transparent. So you can set that here, so you can actually see the infill rendered. Transparency is 0.1. And then we have the perimeter preview, which is same thing again, just like the preview here. So this could actually be plugged in here. Okay. So this would be the transparent shader that is also part of the 3D printed shader pack. And this is what you should get when you've opened a file and render this scene. Of course, this is all fine, but what about your own custom model? So let's see how we can do that. Now, I would suggest to start by simply using this file, because it has lights, because it has things set up the way you need to have them set up. It has this script in here that you will need for this to make work. So first step, let's just get rid of the shader ball and also hide the text. So we just have this empty backdrop here. And let's get an STL in here. Right, so if you have a 3D model, you usually have an STL. Of course, you can get any other model in here, it doesn't matter. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just gonna import an STL. And I have one here, which is this one. And when you import STLs, they're usually scaled quite weirdly. Usually they are huge. This is my big backdrop, and this is really big now. And this part is, you might be wondering, what is this? Let me quickly show you. So I designed this phone dock for my OnePlus phone, and it's 2 parts. So you printed this part, and then you printed this bottom part, this foot here separately, and you just stick it in there. And I hope you can see this. And this bottom part here, that's what that file is. So that's that part that you have on the bottom there. Has a little thing in the back here to hold the cable. And I think on my first 3D print, I didn't even have that. Yep. Okay, so this is that. And this was done, like I said, in Fusion 360. And if we go into edit mode, you can see it's all triangles. And we know triangles are not that great for doing subdivisions, but we'll check that out in a few seconds. So of course it's huge, so let's scale this guy down. Let's make where is he? Scale, maybe rotate a little, put him over here. Now he's also in the floor. So cheesy, bring him up, lay him down like this. Okay, this would be that. Now I have to point my camera down a little. Can do that with this empty here, because that's the track 2 for the camera. And then we have this nice looking object. Of course, now we want this to be also, I think, I want to switch this over to Filament with a medium high contrast. Okay, so now we look like that. That will be our model. Now let's make it look like it's 3D printed. So select the model and give it the white plastic 3D printed. And you can say, nothing's happening. Why? What is going on? Why doesn't it show up? It's not working. Well, first of all, I scaled this object just by using S. So now this object has a scale here, scale factor basically. And we all know, anybody who has ever seen any Blender Guru video, we all know that we have to apply the scale. So select the object, Ctrl A, apply, scale. Okay, now we have something showing up because now we have the scale set to 1. And an alternative, of course, would have been to scale the object in edit mode so that the scale here, the factor, stays at 1. But if you scale it just in object mode like this, then you have to apply the scale. First thing done, but now those layer lines are weird. Like how was that printed? That's not right. And that is because this shader, the internals of my 3D printed plastic shader, needs to know where the top is so that it can decide where to put the lines going up on the Z-axis basically, and where to put the top fill layer. And that is what this script is for. So you select your object, you hit this little play button on the Bake Normals to Vertex Color script, which comes with this shader. And what that does is it creates this color vertex color slot here, which is now called color attributes, called normals. And this normals color attribute is used in there. So now the shader knows where to put the lines going up and where to fill in the top. Let me just jump in here. Top fill rotation. Is this working? Yes. Okay, so let's put it diagonally so we can see this has the top fill and this has the lines going up. Okay, so this already looks pretty cool, but now of course we need our subdivision surface modifier set to adaptive subdivisions. Now let's look at this. Oh my god, what happened? This is horrible. We can fix it a little bit by setting it to simple, but still we are getting like these weird artifacts here. What is all of this? This doesn't look nice. And the reason for that is that our original model coming from Fusion 360 is all made up of triangles, as you can see in edit mode. Now triangles are really not good for subdivision modifiers. What we actually want are quads. So if we model this in a quad-based way, like you would with sub-D modeling techniques, then of course you don't have to do anything special. But since this is a model coming from a different software and it's all done in triangles, we can now not use our shader. That sucks, but there's an easy fix for it. So let me just get rid of this subdivision modifier real quick. So we're back to this. Now the easiest thing, and the thing I always do when I use this shader to render anything, is just a simple remesh. So you add a modifier, go to remesh, and then you increase this voxel size here. So you use the voxel, or I like to use the voxel. You can try the smooth too, but I think the voxel always works really well. Of course, this is way too big now. The voxels are too big, so let's turn them down quite a bit. Now this looks pretty nice already. You get these edges here, but remember we're gonna 3D, don't look over here now by the way. We're gonna use this 3D printed thing anyway, and you won't even see this anymore. This is quite high resolution now actually, the 0.01 voxel size. I might go for a 0.02 because now we're actually creating a lot of mesh. A lot of geometry on this mesh. So now I remeshed this real quick and I'm gonna apply this modifier just by hovering over here and Control A. Now it's applied. If I go into edit mode, you can see this is what we have now, and we have quads everywhere, which is perfect for subdivisions. So now let's go back to adding a subdivision surface set to adaptive, which is already done by default. And you can see that doesn't look good either. Why is that? Now we changed our mesh, so we have to do this bake normals to vertex colors again, because we don't have our normals in here anymore, and this node doesn't know where are the sides and where's the top. So let's just hit play. Wait a second, and here it is. So now this looks pretty cool. We have the printed lines going here. We have the top fill going diagonally like this. This looks really nice. So if we zoom in, we go into edit mode and go back out of edit mode, then this gets re-rendered. That's the thing with the adaptive subdivisions. And yep, that looks pretty cool, I think. And now, like a model like this, you probably know how high it is, like how many millimeters thick is this plate here. And then you can play with your layer number here to make it look like the real thing, basically. Okay, so this would be the first thing, and you can also tell that our remesh, which is probably not very accurate, like with these details here, it really doesn't matter anymore because our 3D printed shader creates these lines anyway and messes it up anyway, so you don't have to go too crazy with the remesh detail. Now you can pick a different color, make it orange, and render it out, and it looks like 3D printed. You can also play with the settings, of course, the imperfections and all that. Imperfections are, by the way, only added on the sides here, because that's where you usually get them. When you 3D print something, you get those little knobs and, I don't know, mistakes, basically. So this is a very simple model here. Let's try another one. Let's just hide this guy, get another STL in here, import STL. I have this thing. Again, you have to zoom out to see it. So what is this thing? Let me show you real quick. I saw these online somewhere and I didn't just want to download the finished file. I wanted to design it myself in Fusion 360, so I did. So that's this guy. Okay, and this is actually a holder for your glasses. So it looks like this. They sit in there and then they sit on his huge nose. So there's 3 pieces here. This body part, the nose, which is printed like this on your print bed, and then it has a screw bottom, and you can put something heavy in there. I have some coins in there to just give it some weight so that it doesn't fall over. Yeah, and so this guy I 3D printed in white. It sits on my desk here and holds my glasses. Now let's go back to Blender. All right, so this is obviously this body. Let's go into edit mode so we don't have to apply the scale later. Let's scale them down quite a bit. I don't know, like this. Let's see, let's go object, set origin to geometry, Alt G to bring them down to the center. And then, oh, he's down here. Move him up a little. Let's look through the camera. Let's see what it looks like. GC. Bring him forward a little bit and also rotate so that we can see his face. Okay, that should be nice. Now let's go into edit mode and let's check out the actual geometry. It's all triangles again, of course, because it comes from Fusion 360. Those triangles here are really horrible. So first thing we know, let's check the scale. Yep, that's fine, it's all 1. Now we're gonna remesh this guy. Voxel maybe 0.02 will be good again. Let's see. Yeah, that should be fine. Let's apply it. Cool, shade smooth, always good. Now we have to execute this bake normals to vertex color script so that our shader knows where is the top and where are the sides. Then we can just go to the material and apply our white plastic, which is not white anymore, but orange, but that's okay. And already we can see it looks pretty nice. So we have the top fill in here, yep. And we have the layer lines going up on the Z-axis like this. So this already looks cool, but of course we need a subdivision surface modifier. So let's add that. And also we want adaptive subdivisions because that's what the shader uses. It uses the micro displacements. Yep, and that's it. That will be the 3D printed model. Of course, these layer lines are now huge, so we would have to change those. Set to 50. Let's set 100. And right here is kind of interesting to see that we have on this little eyeball here. We have some top fill there. We even get some over here. And of course we get all this filled in. Probably in the mouth in there should be some top fill too. Here our remesh here messed up the geometry a little. But this is just for demonstration purposes. This is how you use this 3D printed shader. Now let me hide this guy. Let's bring back the shader ball. Let's actually make this white again. Look through the camera, because there's one last thing I have to show you. Of course, I changed this around, so maybe let's not look through the camera. And that is this global Z-axis that is part of this file. So if you use the original file, you also have this thing, print Z-axis, which is an empty. It's just this arrow here. And you can see that right now we're printing this way. So we get the layer lines going across like this, and we have the top fill on the top, just like you can see over here. But I can take this and I can rotate it forwards maybe. And now you can see it is as if we printed this laying down here. If the print bed was here and we printed in this direction. So maybe let's do it like this. And you can see that now our top fill is further forwards. Or if we go front view and we rotate it to the side, now our top fill is this way. So if we printed it that way, right? So with this print z-axis, which you can just rotate around, you can determine a global print z-axis that all of the 3D printed shaders use. Blue uses it and the orange uses it because the lines are going this way now. And if you want to reset it, you select this and hit Alt-R to go back to the original rotation. And then we're back to printing this way. Now, last but not least, let's look at how you can use all of this in your own file. So if you cannot or don't want to start with my file, what options do you have? So let's actually go to New, General, Don't Save. And we have this Blender startup file. Of course, we don't need the cube. Poor cube, but let's import an STL. I don't know which one should we use this time. Let's do that little dude again. Of course, he's not little. So in edit mode, we're gonna scale him down and we will go set origin to geometry, Alt G, GC, bring him up. So we have something like this. Okay. Now let's see, maybe we can turn this into a rendered view right away. Switch off the overlays so it looks like this. Shade smooth, awesome. Now let's remesh him real quick. You already know how it works. Remesh, apply. Then we need that script, but now we're in our own new file and we don't have that script to calculate where are the sides and where's the top. So how do we do that? We'll just could import it. For some reason, at the moment, it is not possible to have a script file as an asset. I think I couldn't find it. So let's do the good old way of linking or appending. I'm just going to append it. And you go to, oh, this is already that file actually. Let's go here. You pick this crispy 3D printed blend file that you downloaded. Pick that and double click it. So you're looking into this file now. And in here, under text, you have the baked normals to vertex color script. We append that. And then we have, where shall I put that? Let's open it from down here. You can go to the text editor and then you have this baked normals to vertex color script in here. Now select this guy, execute the script, and we're done with that. It should have this color thing over here now. We know we have to be in cycles. We have to be in experimental. Of course, we want GPU. And then we want this material in here. We don't have any materials because we started with a naked file. How do we do that? Well, you could append all of the node groups and everything, but that's kind of complicated. In Blender 3, we have an asset browser now. So let's go to the asset browser. And there's nothing in here. The current file doesn't have any assets, but we can add our 3D printed file to our assets. And I'm going to show you how that works. So you go to your Blender preferences, to file paths, and let me delete this quick because this is what you start with. If you have a new Blender installation, you have no asset libraries. You click this little plus icon, you go to the folder that you downloaded my 3D printed file into, or you just move my file into your asset folder that you have on your system. It can be anywhere. Usually you would pick one directory on your system, you put all your asset files in there, and then you just tell Blender, use that directory. I'm going to use this one now. Okay, so you pick a directory and you give it a name here. So since this entire directory is just for the 3D printed thing, I'm going to do it like this. You can add multiple asset directories with this plus icon here. I just have this one now. You can also go to Save Preferences. And now Blender knows, okay, every blend file in that directory is an asset or potentially contains assets now. So right now we have, in the current file, we have no assets, but we now have this asset library that we just created, 3D printed. And it has the materials in there, or the shaders. So all we have to do now is drag and drop this onto there. and we have our white plastic 3D printed on our guy. We can see that there is an issue. We don't have any surface output or displacement output. And I don't know why this is, but for some reason it works when you use my file, but it doesn't work when you use it as an asset. However, there's a fix for this. So let me pull this up like this. Let's go into the shader editor. So we don't have a surface output or displacement output. And I figured out how to fix this. In this node group here, right, in this one, the 3D printed plastic, I have two material outputs, one for cycles and one for EV. And this doesn't seem to work when you use it as an asset, like I said. So let's just get rid of this one and this one. All we're interested is the one for cycles anyway. Now you might have a group output in here already, but if you don't, you can just go shift a group output and then get this node. And then we use from the top part here, the cycles frame. We're gonna use the shader and plug it in here, and we're gonna use this, which is the displacement, and plug it in here. Then we go back out. Now our group has two outputs, and we can put those into a shader material output. So surface output. Now we have a surface output here, and for the displacement we take this color, plug that in there, and then we're back to a working shader with a surface and the displacement. I have to look into this some more, why this is, and maybe I will publish a new version, and then you can download that one on Blender Market and of course on patreon.com. But it still doesn't look right, and that is because we need a subdivision surface modifier, and then have to wait a few seconds. Make sure that this is set to adaptive subdivisions, and then you have a very nice looking 3D printed shader. And it has imperfections. Yeah, looks pretty cool. So this is how you would add this to your own file. You do the material through the asset browser. And if you use a newer Blender version, I'm not sure when this stopped working, just to drag and drop it on. You have to do that little trick here with the shader editor to plug it into out here into a material output node. Maybe this gets fixed in a future Blender version, or I can publish a new 3D printed shader. However, on top of that, you need that script, and you can always link that in with the file, a link or append, because you need to execute this script on your model to get this normal's vertex color slot. Alright, that's it. I hope it explains a little bit how to use this and how to fix some issues and what you can do in my startup file and what all the settings are, and how to use the shader in your own file and how to get the script into your own file, because that doesn't work as an asset yet. The whole asset thing is a little bit shaky still, but of course, there's always ways to fix stuff and to make it work. If you already purchased this shader from Blender Market, or if you are already a patron, first of all, thank you very much for your support. I hope this video explains a few things that you might have had troubles with in the past. If you have any other questions or suggestions, just drop me a note on either Patreon or on YouTube. I have many other Blender tutorials here on my YouTube channels, so maybe consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Crispy out.